For 5 millennia, the world's most ambitious empires made the exact same fatal mistake. They looked at the Iranian Plateau and saw a prize to be taken. From the iron-clad phalanxes of Alexander the Great to the unstoppable Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan, they arrived with a single, brutal objective to erase this civilization from the face of the earth forever. In any other part of the world, such catastrophic blows would have been terminal. The Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the titans of antiquity, all eventually dissolved into the genetic and cultural dust of history. But with Iran, something entirely inexplicable took place. Time and time again, despite losing on the battlefield, losing their capitals, and enduring centuries of occupation, the Iranians did something no one else could do. They didn't just survive their conquerors, they consumed them. Within a few decades of every invasion, the brutal occupiers would begin speaking the Persian language, building Persian architecture, adopting their bureaucracy, and even wearing their clothes. Again and again, the East essentially digested the West and the nomads.
How has Iran managed, from antiquity right up to the present day, to force every major world power to reckon with it? How did they preserve an identity that refused to die?
And how did it happen that Great Persia, a country with a 5,000-year history, voluntarily abandoned its legendary name, forcing the entire world to call it Iran? This is the story of how a single nation invented the concept of time we live in today, turned geopolitics into a holy war between light and dark, and learned how to lose battles in order to ultimately win eternity. To understand the depth of this civilization, we need to rewind time far beyond the reach of standard history books. Traditionally, the Western world considers Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt to be the sole cradles of civilization. In this worldview, Iran is often sidelined, and that is a massive historical injustice. Evolution took its natural course here. 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals dominated these lands, replaced by Cro-Magnons 36,000 years ago. But the real revolution began later. Archaeologists have discovered urban-type settlements on Iranian territory, like the Jeroft culture and the Sok ziggurats, dating back 7,000 years. Ceramic vessels from the 4th millennium before Christ irrefutably prove that one of the oldest civilizations on the planet evolved right here, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mesopotamia and China. The first major geopolitical player in these lands was Elam. The Elamites were so powerful that by the 26th century before Christ, they were practically dictating their will to the Sumerians. But the most mind-blowing event happened in the 23rd century BC, when the Akkadian king Naram Sin went to war with Elam. The conflict didn't end with a simple truce. A written treaty was signed, guaranteeing Elam's independence on the condition that they aligned their foreign policy. Think about that. This is the first documented international treaty in human history. The Iranian space stood at the very origins of global diplomacy. The people we call Iranians today arrived later, sometime between the 20th and 15th centuries before Christ. Nomadic tribes began descending onto this mountainous plateau from the north, from the steppes of Central Asia and the Caucasus. They belonged to the giant family of Indo-European nations. Amazingly, their ancient language was a direct relative of Latin, Greek, and the languages spoken across all of Europe today, including English and Spanish. Settling on these lands, they began calling themselves Aryans, meaning noble, and named their new homeland Aryanum Veja, the land of the Aryans. Over time, this word morphed into the familiar name we know as Iran. They mixed with the ancient culture of Elam and split into powerful alliances, the most famous of which became the Medes and the Persians. It was right here, in these harsh mountains and deserts, that the primary weapon of the Iranians was born. It was not chariots, nor was it special bows. It was ideology. Long before the emergence of Christianity and Islam, a religion was born on the Iranian Plateau that turned human consciousness upside down deep. Zoroastrianism. For the ancient Iranian, life was not simply a series of meaningless accidents. The universe was perceived as the battlefield of a total, uncompromising war between Ahura Mazda, the transcendent god of light and truth, and Ahriman, the spirit of absolute evil and darkness. To be Iranian meant to be a warrior of light. Zoroastrianism did something even more massive. This tradition was the first in history to declare that time does not move in a circle. Time is linear. The world had a beginning, and it will have an inevitable end, a final battle between light and dark, a purification of the world by fire, and a last judgment. When the Persians conquered Babylon in the 6th century BC, they liberated the Jews who were languishing there in captivity. During this period of close contact, Jewish thinkers adopted from the Zoroastrians the culture of anticipating the end of times and the final judgment. Later, this doctrine flowed into Christianity and Islam. Even Friedrich Nietzsche acknowledged that Iran played the key role in discovering the linear time within which we still think today. The first truly great state of the Aryans was Media, formed in 670 BC. But their hegemony was cut short by their own relatives, the Persians. In 550 BC, a man named Cyrus the Great united the tribes of the Persians and the Medes. Out of this union, he began building the Achaemenid Empire, the first superpower in history. Cyrus was different from the tyrants of the past. When conquering Lydia or Babylon, he did not destroy their temples or enslave their populations. He built an empire on respect. His successor, Darius I, expanded the borders from Egypt to the Indus Valley. Nearly 50 million people, half the population of the earth at that time, lived under Persian rule. Darius divided the country into 20 administrative districts called satrapies, introduced a unified tax system, and laid down a network of roads along which the fastest state postal service in the world raced. But history does not forgive weakness. Cyrus the Great eventually met his end in a brutal battle against nomadic tribes in Central Asia. According to legend, Queen Tomaris of the Massageta cut off his head and threw it into a sack of blood, mocking his thirst for conquest.
Despite this tragedy, the empire lived on. We are often told that the Greco-Persian Wars crushed the Persians. That is a myth.
While the Greeks defended their independence for the giant Achaemenid Empire, losing a few fringe cities was like a mosquito bite. The Persians simply changed tactics, funding Athens and then Sparta to pit the Greeks against each other. Ultimately, the exhausted Greeks were forced to sign a humiliating treaty on the terms of the Persian king. What the Persians could not take with an army, they bought. The real catastrophe came with Alexander the Great in 330 BC. He ruthlessly crushed the Persian army and burned the magnificent Persepolis. It seemed the 1,000-year history of Iran was finished, but that is exactly when the Iranian survival mechanism kicked in. Eastern culture began to methodically devour its Western conquerors. Alexander himself started wearing Persian clothes and adopted Persian court etiquette. By the 3rd century BC, the Parthians kicked the Greeks out and created an empire that successfully stood its ground against Rome for 5 centuries. Then came the Sassanid dynasty in the year 224, a new golden age. They created a fiercely centralized state where Zoroastrianism became the official doctrine. Society was an ideal meritocracy, divided into strict castes of priests, warriors, and bureaucrats. But 400 years of grueling wars with Rome and Byzantium bled Iran dry. By the mid-7th century, the Sassanid Empire was a bleeding giant. A new force from the Arabian Peninsula capitalized on this, the Arab Caliphate. In 651, the Persian capital fell. The Arabs brought a new religion, Islam, and a new language for any other culture. This would have meant the total erasure of identity. But the Persians did it again. The Islamic Caliphate began to rely heavily on Persian scholars and poets. The Farsi language did not just survive, it outlived the empires that tried to suppress it. After the Arabs, a true apocalypse crashed down in 1220 and Genghis Khan. The Mongols slaughtered entire cities. It seemed Iran would turn into a permanent pasture for nomads. But when the Mongols founded a state here, something incredible happened. The harsh conquerors suddenly embraced Islam, made Persian the language of the state, and began building grandiose Persian mosques. At the end of the 14th century, Tamerlane repeated this cycle. He erected pyramids of severed heads, yet stood in awe of Persian culture, taking Iranian artisans back to his capital to spark a Persian renaissance. The Iranian cultural code completely reprogrammed its invaders. In 1501, Shah Ismail founded the Safavid state, making Shia Islam the official religion and forever separating Iran from the rest of the Islamic world. By the 20th century, the country became a backdrop for the Great Game between the British and Russian empires. But in 1925, Reza Shah Pahlavi took power. In 1935, he made a move that shook global diplomacy. He declared that the country must no longer be called Persia, a name associated with fairy tales and carpets, but Iran. This was a statement. We are a modern, powerful nation with ancient roots, and you will reckon with us. The history of Iran is a history of radical pivots, leading ultimately to the 1979 revolution and the birth of a theocratic republic. Today, two different states exist in our minds: the Iran of geopolitical tension and the Persia of romantic, mythical grandeur. Over 5,000 years, this culture developed the ultimate mechanism for survival. When clashing with Macedonians, Arabs, or Mongols, they did not disappear, they absorbed. They stood at the origins of civilization and invented the time in which we live. Because sometimes,
Hidden behind the simple name of a country is a quiet, invisible war, who we are today and how the world wants to see us.